The smell of pot roast reached me the moment I stepped through the front door, which made no sense at all. I had been in Vancouver for 5 days, presenting at a national medical supply conference, and nobody had told me they were coming over for dinner. I set my rolling suitcase against the baseboard and pulled off my boots, noticing the wet slush marks on the mat that weren't mine. 3 pairs of extra shoes by the door. I called out, "Robert, I'm home early." No answer, but the dining room light was on, spilling gold down the hallway. I padded toward it in my socked feet. They were all sitting at the table I had inherited from my grandmother. My husband, Robert, at the head, still wearing his work shirt. My mother, Yvette, rigid-backed in the chair she always claimed when she visited, her hands folded tight in her lap. My sister Claire to Robert's left, wearing a cashmere sweater I had never seen before. And my son, Brandon, 26 years old, in the seat closest to the door, like he wanted an escape route. "What's going on?" I asked. "Is someone hurt?" Brandon stood up. He didn't come to hug me. He stood the way someone stands in a boardroom when they're about to deliver bad news they've already rehearsed. "Mom, you need to sit down and listen," he said. "Things are going to be different from now on." I looked at Robert. He was studying a knot in the wood grain of the table. "Different how?" My mother lifted her chin. "Margaret, your husband deserves to be happy. We all do." Claire traced her finger along the edge of her placemat. And then Robert looked up. What I saw on his face wasn't guilt. It wasn't even sadness. It was the particular impatience of someone who has already moved on and finds the formalities tiresome. "Mum," Brandon said, "Aunt Claire makes him happy. She understands him. We think it would be best for everyone if you accepted that." I looked at my sister. Claire finally met my eyes and gave me the smallest, most practiced smile I have ever seen on a human being. Robert said nothing. He reached across the table and rested his hand on top of hers. I walked back down the hallway, put my boots back on, and walked out the front door into the February dark of Oakville, Ontario. The next morning, I had 94 missed calls. "Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with me today." Before I start, I would love to know which city you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to how I got here, and more importantly, how I made sure I did not stay down. The night I drove away from my own home, the temperature was -18 with wind chill. My car thermometer blinked the number at me like a taunt as I pulled out of the driveway of the house I had chosen, the house I had renovated twice, the house where I had given birth to Brandon during a January blizzard because the roads were too bad to get to the hospital in time. I drove west on Lakeshore with no destination, only the muscle memory of 31 years of marriage keeping my hands on the wheel. I needed gas. The low fuel light had been on since Pearson Airport. I pulled into the Petro-Canada on Kerr Street, stepped out into the cold that bit straight through my conference blazer, and slid my RBC Visa into the pump. Declined. I tried again. Declined. I pulled out my personal debit card, the one linked to my individual checking account, the one where my salary from our company was deposited every 2 weeks. I went inside. The teenager at the counter tried it twice. Insufficient funds. He said it without looking up from his phone. I stood under the fluorescent lights and opened my banking app. Access denied, account locked pending review. I tried the joint savings. Same message. I tried the company expense card Robert and I shared. Card canceled. In the time it had taken me to drive from our house to a gas station on Kerr Street, Robert had called our bank and frozen every account attached to my name. You do not do that in 20 minutes by accident. You do that when you have been planning it for months. I dug through my purse, past boarding pass stubs and lip balm and the granola bar I had taken from the hotel breakfast in Vancouver and never eaten. At the bottom, in the small zipped pocket I rarely opened, I found $150 in cash. $350s I had withdrawn before the conference for incidentals. I paid for $45 of gas in cash, bought a coffee and a muffin with the change from the till, and got back in my car. I had $105 left to my name. I drove along the lakeshore until I found a Comfort Inn with a vacancy sign. The night rate was $89. The woman at the desk took my cash without comment. Room 108. The heater worked, but the thermostat was stuck at 22, and the air smelled like someone else's fabric softener. I sat on the edge of the bed in my conference clothes with $16.30 in my coat pocket, and I listened to the trucks on the QEW, and I let myself cry for exactly 1 hour. I have always been precise that way. Then I opened my laptop. I was not done yet. Not even close. To understand what happened that night in my dining room, you have to understand how it was built. You have to go back 40 years, to a house in Hamilton where my mother, Yvette, raised 2 daughters on a schoolteacher's salary after my father left. Claire was born beautiful. Not just pretty, but the kind of beautiful that makes strangers stop mid-sentence. Golden and easy and utterly certain of her own charm. I was 3 years older, studious, plain by comparison, with my mother's stubborn jaw and my father's tendency to disappear into spreadsheets when things got difficult. I was the responsible one. Claire was the treasure. When I received my acceptance to the pharmacy program at the University of Toronto at the age of 18, my mother looked up from doing Claire's hair and said, "That's wonderful, Margaret," and went back to braiding. When I graduated with distinction, she threw a party, but the party was also for Claire's 16th birthday, and the cake said, "Happy birthday, Claire." When I landed my first position as a clinical pharmacist at a hospital in Etobicoke, my mother called to tell me the news, and then spent 11 minutes asking whether I thought Claire should move to Toronto to pursue her modeling work, and could I lend her the first and last month's rent on an apartment because Yvette's credit wasn't great. I lent the money. Claire moved to Toronto, booked 2 catalog shoots, and spent the rest of the money on clothes. I never saw $1 of it returned. The pattern was set before I was old enough to name it. I was the one who could manage. Claire was the one who needed managing. I was the safety net. Claire was the trapeze artist, always certain someone would catch her. I accepted it because I had been conditioned to accept it, and because somewhere in that conditioning was the belief that if I gave enough, worked enough, loved enough, my mother would one day look at me the way she looked at Claire. She never did. I was her emergency fund, not her pride. And then I met Robert. He was 32 and I was 30. And we were both at a hospital suppliers trade show in Toronto at the Metro Convention Center. He was in pharmaceutical distribution, and I was beginning to think about what came after clinical work. He was tall and persuasive and laughed at the right moments and told me I was the sharpest person in the room. I did not know yet that he said that to most rooms. We married within a year. 14 months later, we co-founded Meridian Health Supplies, a medical and pharmaceutical distribution company serving clinics, long-term care homes, and hospital networks across Ontario. The Division of Labor was established in the first week and never formally renegotiated. Robert was the face. He had the handshake, the golf game, the voice that made procurement officers feel like old friends. I was the infrastructure. I negotiated our supplier contracts, managed the regulatory compliance with Health Canada, maintained our controlled substance licenses, set up the corporate banking relationships, filed our HST returns, and kept us solvent through a recession in 2008 and a supplier collapse in 2015 that would have ended any company without someone who had memorized every clause of every distribution agreement we had ever signed. Robert would tell people at dinner parties that I was his secret weapon. He thought it was a compliment. He did not notice that I had stopped smiling when he said it somewhere around year 12. Our son Brandon grew up watching his father shake hands and his mother solve problems and absorbed exactly the wrong lesson from both. He adored Robert. He tolerated me. I told myself it was a phase. Sitting in room 108 at the Comfort Inn on the QEW, I knew the phase had lasted 26 years. I opened the folder on my laptop that Robert did not know existed. When we built Meridian's IT infrastructure, I had hired a firm out of Kitchener to set up our server. Robert had wanted a security backdoor, a master administrator account that could override all other credentials in the event of a lockout or a rogue employee situation. He wanted something he could access from home without going through IT. I built it for him. I generated the credentials, explained the system, and watched him write the password on a post-it note that he stuck to the inside of his desk drawer, where it remained for approximately 2 weeks before he told me he had lost it, and could I just reset it for him whenever he needed it. After the 3rd time, he stopped asking and assumed I would always be there to type it for him. He was right, until he wasn't. I typed the administrator string from memory. It was the name of the street we had lived on when Brandon was born, combined with the date of our first government contract award and the postal code of my grandmother's house in Hamilton. Robert knew none of those things well enough to guess them. Access granted. The Meridian server opened like a wound. I did not go looking for evidence of the affair first. I went looking for the company because I knew Robert, and I knew that whatever he had done to my marriage, he had almost certainly done something worse to the balance sheet. I was right. What I found was not just an affair, it was a scheme. There was a folder in the shared drive labeled Vendor Reconciliation November, which was odd because November Reconciliation had already been filed and I had filed it myself before flying to Vancouver. Inside were wire transfers I had not authorized. $60,000 to a numbered company, $32,000 to a supplier I did not recognize. A lease agreement for office space in Mississauga under a company name I had never seen. Clearview Distribution Partners Incorporated. I ran the corporate registry. Clearview Distribution Partners Incorporated had been incorporated 8 months ago. The listed director was not Robert, it was Claire. My sister, who had never held a job for longer than 14 months in her adult life, was the registered director of a competing distribution company being built with funds taken from Meridian Health Supplies. I went further. I found the emails. There were 4 months of them. A chain between Robert and Claire using a personal Gmail account Robert had forgotten I knew about because I had set up his phone when he forgot his Apple password in 2019. The emails were detailed. Clearview would be positioned to absorb Meridian's long-term care contracts when Meridian was declared insolvent. The insolvency would be managed. Robert would resign as CEO, citing irreconcilable differences with his co-founder, meaning me. Claire would use the Clearview infrastructure to tender for the same contracts at a lower price. The proceeds would flow through a series of transactions that the emails described as tax-efficient restructuring. What they actually were was fraud. Robert was using company money to fund a competitor and then planning to sink Meridian, leave me with nothing, and rebuild the business under Claire's name. There was one more email, dated 3 weeks ago, from Robert to Claire. The CRA audit triggers are going to be Maggie's problem when this is done. She signed everything. Let her sort it out. I stared at that sentence for a long time. He had not only planned to steal from me, he had planned to make me the one standing in front of the Canada Revenue Agency, answering questions about money I had not taken. I saved every document. I downloaded every email. I built a folder on my portable drive and I encrypted it with a password that no one in my family would ever guess. Then I sat back on that hotel bed and I thought about what I actually had and what I still needed. The evidence was damning, but I needed someone powerful enough to move faster than Robert's lawyers. I needed someone with resources, someone who knew Bay Street, someone who had a reason to want Robert to fail. One name came to me immediately: Dorothea Okafor. Dorothea ran Okafor Group, a healthcare procurement consultancy that had been Meridian's most serious competitor for a government contract 3 years ago. We had won that contract. Dorothea had publicly stated that the bid process had been irregular. She was right, though I had not known it at the time. Robert had taken a procurement officer to a Maple Leafs playoff game and paid for the tickets through a vendor account, which violated the provincial procurement integrity rules. Dorothea had filed a complaint. The complaint was dismissed on a technicality. She had never forgotten it, and she had every right not to. I called Okafor Group at 7 in the morning from the prepaid phone I had bought at the Shoppers Drug Mart across from the hotel for $10. I had exactly $6 left after that purchase. Dorothea answered her own line, which told me everything about the kind of woman she was. I said, "Dorothea, this is Margaret Harwood from Meridian. I know you have no reason to help me. I want to tell you why you should," she said. "I'm listening." By 9 o'clock, I was sitting across from her in her office on University Avenue, still in my conference clothes, still with slush on my boots, and I watched her read through the documents I had printed at the Hotel Business Center. She was 64 years old, silver-haired, precise in the way that people who have spent decades being underestimated become precise. She read for 20 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. "The Clearview contracts overlap with the provincial tender we lost to Meridian," she said. "That bid was manipulated." "I know," I said. "I found the documentation last night." She held my gaze for a moment. "Why are you bringing this to me and not directly to the RCMP?" "Because I have $16 in my pocket and Robert has had 3 weeks to brief his lawyers," I said. "I need someone who can move at the same speed he does." Dorothea was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and called someone. "Wesley," she said, "I need you here at 10. Bring the litigation team." She hung up and looked at me. "My general counsel is the best corporate litigator in Ontario. He will handle your case." She paused. "And when this is settled and Meridian is in proper hands, I want a first conversation about that provincial contract tender." "First conversation," I agreed. "Good," she said. And for the first time since I had walked out of my own house, I felt the ground solidify under my feet. What followed was the most disciplined 3 weeks of my life. I rented a furnished studio in the annex under my maiden name, Beaumont, paying first and last, with an emergency line of credit I had kept in my name alone since 2009. A small private precaution I had taken after the 2008 recession scared me badly enough to want something Robert could not reach. It wasn't much. It was enough. Dorothea's counsel, Wesley, filed for an emergency injunction that froze Meridian's accounts pending a financial review, which had the secondary effect of alerting the company's board of directors, 2 independent members I had appointed, that something was seriously wrong. I did not contact Brandon. I wanted to. Every day I did not. I could see from secondary accounts I still had access to that he was spending money he did not have, that he had moved into Robert's downtown condo, that he had been given a title at Clearview Distribution Partners Incorporated that did not match any skill set he possessed. Robert had bought him with a title and an expense account, the same currency Marcus used in a story I once heard, the same transaction that has been conducted between selfish fathers and impressionable sons since the beginning of time. I watched and I waited. Meanwhile, Robert was not worried. He thought I was defeated. He thought the frozen accounts would drive me to the separation agreement his lawyer had couriered to my old address, which I intercepted through a mail redirect I had set up before he thought to cancel it. The agreement proposed that I surrender my 50% ownership of Meridian in exchange for a one-time settlement of $400,000 and a waiver of future claims. It was an insult, and it was calculated to feel like a lifeline to a woman he thought had nothing. Wesley and I spent 3 days on our counterproposal. On the surface, it looked like capitulation. I would accept $350,000. I would waive future alimony. Robert would retain operational control of Meridian. But embedded in Section 11 of the 60-page agreement, written in the dense language of corporate law that Robert would never read himself and that his lawyer, a real estate specialist Robert had hired because he was cheap and familiar, was likely to skim past, was a single clause. In the event that either party is found to have engaged in undisclosed fraudulent activity, misappropriation of corporate assets, or conduct giving rise to criminal liability at any time prior to or during the marriage, this agreement shall be rendered null and void, and all assets, including shares, real property, and corporate holdings, shall revert in their entirety to the non-offending party as damages. Robert signed the agreement on a Tuesday afternoon. He called his assistant afterward and told her to book a restaurant for Friday. He was celebrating. He was already calling Meridian his. The annual Meridian Stakeholder Appreciation Gala was scheduled for the second Friday of March at the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto, a tradition I had started 8 years ago as a way of thanking our longest-standing clients. Robert had decided to use this year's gala to announce what he was calling a strategic restructuring his plan to fold Meridian's assets into Clearview under new management. 312 guests had confirmed. Procurement directors from 12 long-term care networks, administrators from 4 hospital corporations, 2 provincial government officials, representatives from every major supplier we worked with. Robert wanted an audience. He had always wanted an audience. He was about to get one he had not planned for. On the afternoon of the gala, I was sitting in Dorothea's boardroom when my phone rang. It was Derek. Derek was Claire's ex-husband, a contractor from Barrie she had married and financially depleted over 4 years before leaving him with the mortgage and a retriever named Stanley. I had always liked Derek. He was decent in the way that quiet, hard-working people are decent. without fanfare and without exception. He had heard through the small circuit of people who knew us both what had happened. He called because he had something. When Claire had moved out of their house in Barrie, she had left a banker's box in the garage. Derek had meant to drop it off or throw it out for years and had done neither. He had opened it the week before, looking for a document of his own he thought might be in there. What he found instead were credit card statements in my name from a Scotiabank account I had never opened, going back 4 years, with a total balance outstanding of $62,000, and a handwritten note from Robert confirming he had made a payment against one of the cards to prevent a collections notice from reaching our joint mail. There was a second note. It read, "Keep the spending under $8,000 a month for now. Once this is done, we split it 50-50. Come on, Claire. Nearly there." Identity fraud. My sister had opened credit accounts in my name while she was living in my house, run them to the limit over 4 years, and Robert had known and helped conceal it. Derek drove the box to Toronto the next morning and handed it to me in the Tim Hortons parking lot on Front Street. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has been quietly furious on behalf of another person for a very long time. "Give them everything they deserve," he said. "I intend to," I told him, and put the box in my car. I drove to the hotel. I had a gala to attend. The Royal York's ballroom was extraordinary that evening. The kind of evening I had organized every year for a decade, though this year someone else had ordered the flowers and the arrangements and had chosen an excess of white orchids that I personally found cold. Robert stood at the entrance in a new suit, shaking hands with a warmth that I recognized as performance, the exact warmth I had watched him deploy at 100 of these events, the warmth that closed contracts and charmed government officials and had nothing behind it but calculation. Claire was beside him in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent and which I was reasonably certain had been charged to the Clearview corporate card. My mother was there too, near the bar, telling someone I didn't know that family is everything, which she appeared to believe only when it benefited Claire. I came in through the service entrance wearing the coat I had bought at the Hudson's Bay the day before, charcoal gray, fitted, the kind of coat that is not asking for your attention but will have it anyway. Dorothea was at my left. Wesley and his team were at the edges of the room. 2 officers from the Ontario Provincial Police Financial Crimes Unit and an investigator from the Canada Revenue Agency were in the lobby, prepared and briefed, waiting on my signal. Robert began his remarks at precisely 8 o'clock. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about the evolution of healthcare distribution in Ontario. He said that great companies must be willing to reinvent themselves. He said that the next phase of Meridian's story was one he was proud to introduce. The slide deck behind him was his, a sleek presentation I had never seen before, full of Clearview's branding and promises about streamlined service and competitive pricing. I gave Dorothea a look. She nodded once. The feed switched. What appeared on the screen behind Robert was not his slide. It was the email chain I had found on the Meridian server, his name at the top, Claire's Gmail address. The subject line, Meridian Wind-Down Timeline. The room went very quiet. Robert turned around. For the first time since I had walked out of my house, I watched real fear move across his face. He said, "Cut the feed." He looked toward the audiovisual booth. The technician in the booth was Wesley's contact. The screen did not go dark. It advanced to the next document, the wire transfer records. $60,000 out of Meridian's operating account to Clearview Distribution Partners Incorporated, a company registered 8 months ago with my sister listed as director. A murmur moved through the room. I walked down the center of the ballroom. In the silence, the sound of my heels on the parquet was very clear. 312 people watched me come. Robert stared at me, and his face cycled through surprise and fury, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding that he had miscalculated badly. "Margaret," he said into the microphone that was still live. "This is completely out of character for me," I said, my voice carrying without effort. "You're right. I have spent 31 years being entirely reasonable." I had a small remote in my hand. I pressed it. The screen changed again. His email. "The CRA audit triggers are going to be Maggie's problem when this is done. She signed everything. Let her sort it out." I looked at the government officials in the third row. They were leaning forward. I pressed the remote a third time. "The fraudulent bid documents from the provincial contract 3 years ago. the tickets to the playoff game, the vendor account they were charged to. One of the two provincial officials took out his phone and began typing. "This is fabricated," Claire announced from the side of the room, her voice climbing. "She's unstable. Ask anyone who knows her. She's been erratic for months." "She forged those, forged," I said, and smiled at her for the first time in a long time. I pressed the remote one final time. The credit card statements, my name on the account, her billing address, 4 years of purchases, $62,000, and Robert's handwritten note. "Come on, Claire. Nearly there." The room was absolutely still. I watched Claire's face drain of its performance. I watched my mother put down her champagne glass very slowly and look at my sister with an expression I had never seen her direct at Claire before. It was not anger. It was the dawning, devastating look of a woman realizing that the child she had protected at every cost had pulled her into something she cannot now escape. "The separation agreement Robert signed last Tuesday," I said, addressing the room and Robert equally, "contains a clause that voids all terms and reverts all assets to me in the event of criminal conduct. I have the original." Wesley, Dorothea's general counsel, stepped forward and placed a copy of the agreement on the nearest table. Robert looked at it. He looked at me. He said, quietly, "You planned this from the motel. From the Comfort Inn, on the QEW." "Yes," I said. "Room 108. He shook his head. Something in him seemed to collapse from the inside. "I should have known you'd find the back door. You built the company with the person who designed the infrastructure," I said. "Did you really think I didn't know every entrance and exit?" The OPP officers came in from the lobby. Dorothea stepped to my side. The room divided around us like water. Robert was arrested for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy. Claire was taken in separate custody on charges of identity theft and fraud over $5,000, a federal offense under the Criminal Code of Canada. The CRA investigator stayed to speak with the board members I had called to the table before the gala began. My mother sat down in a ballroom chair and did not speak to anyone for a long time. I did not go to her. Not then. Brandon was not at the gala. I had known he would not be there when I checked the guest list. I found out later that evening, through a message from a Meridian employee I trusted, that he had been at the condo, that he had seen the news break on social media, and that he had left without telling anyone where he was going. 3 days later, he called me. He did not give me an excuse when I picked up. He said only, "Mom, I'm sorry." Those 3 words carried the weight of everything he could not yet fully articulate. I did not make it easy. "I know," I said. "Come to my office Monday morning. 8 o'clock. He came. He looked like he had not slept in days, which I suspected was accurate. He sat across from me and waited, the same way I had once waited across from a bank manager who held everything I needed in his hands. I spoke plainly. I told him that what had happened was not entirely his fault and also not free of consequence. That his father had used his desire to feel important, and that desire was understandable, but the choices it led to were his. That I was not going to give him money. That I was not going to give him a title. That if he wanted to be part of what came next, he would start in operations, minimum wage, reporting to the logistics manager who had worked at Meridian for 11 years and had more knowledge in one shift than most people accumulate in a career. I told him that the door of my life was open, but that he would have to walk through it on his own. He picked up the pen I set in front of him and signed the employment form. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You're not what I thought you were." I asked him what he thought I was. "Just the one who kept everything running," he said. I didn't realize running everything was the whole thing. I looked at my son for a long moment. "Now you know," I said. "Don't be late Monday." The criminal proceedings were handled by the Crown. Robert pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000 and conspiracy to commit fraud, which under the criminal code carries significant federal consequences. He received a sentence of 6 years. Claire accepted a plea arrangement that resulted in 3 years in a federal correctional facility and a restitution order for the credit card debt she had run in my name. She wept in the courtroom. My mother, who had driven to Toronto for every single one of Claire's court appearances, sat in the gallery and looked smaller than I had ever seen her. After the sentencing, she waited for me on the courthouse steps in the March cold. I stopped when I saw her. She did not make a speech. She did not defend herself. She said only, I was unfair to you for a very long time. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about what I wanted to say and what was true and whether those things were the same. Yes, I said. You were. She nodded. She pulled her coat tighter. Is there anything? Not yet, I said. Maybe eventually. I walked to my car. That was the most honest thing either of us had said to each other in 40 years. 1 year later, I am in my office on the 14th floor of a building on University Avenue. The Meridian Health Supplies sign outside has been redesigned, cleaner, the kind of logo that does not need to announce itself. Dorothea Okafor sits on the board. The provincial contract that was taken from her 3 years ago through a manipulated bid was returned through a formal review process and re-tendered. Meridian won it legitimately. We are now the largest independent medical supply distributor in Ontario, and we are expanding into British Columbia. Brandon has been in the logistics department for 11 months. He was late twice in the first week. He has not been late since. He sends me dry, funny texts about what he is learning, the kind of texts that tell me a person is beginning to understand the value of competence over performance. Last Thursday, he sent me a message that said, "Mum, I sorted the Winnipeg shipment routing error without asking anyone. Saved 3 days on delivery. Am I getting a raise?" I wrote back, "No, but dinner's on me Friday." He responded with a thumbs up, and I laughed out loud in my office for the first time in what felt like a very long time. Dorothea knocked and came in with a bottle of Riesling from Niagara-on-the-Lake, the good kind, the kind you open for something worth marking. She set 2 glasses on my desk. "To the woman who wrote the fine print," she said. "To the woman who read it," I replied. We drank. Outside the window, the city was bright and cold and entirely indifferent to what any of us had survived to get here. That indifference used to frighten me. Now it felt like freedom. I lost a husband. I lost a sister. For now, at least. I lost a version of my mother, who had never quite existed in the first place. What I gained was the company I had built, the son who was finding himself in it, and the certain knowledge that the person who kept everything running was never, in fact, invisible. She was just patient. She was biding her time. And she knew where every door was, because she was the one who had built them all. Thank you for listening. If you are holding on to people who have spent years making you feel like the one who manages so that someone else can shine, I want you to hear this. Your usefulness is not your worth. Your reliability is not an invitation. If my story helps one person decide that enough is finally enough, then every word of it was worth telling. If you've been through something like this, a family betrayal, a toxic marriage, a moment where you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to hear from you. Hit the like button if this story moved you, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I share a new story every single day. Write your city in the comments. I'm so curious to know where all of you wonderful people are. And now 2 of my most popular stories will come up on your screen. You choose what to watch next. Take care of yourselves. You've earned it.